Before we dive into this, I need you to hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what are you doing right now? Let's build this community together. Here's what you need to know. I was taken to hell by mistake. Not because I deserved it, not because I made deals or summoned anything, just a bureaucratic error in the cosmic system. And when they realized what happened, everything started falling apart. This isn't about redemption or escape. It's about what happens when you're the glitch that breaks reality itself. I woke up sitting in a chair I didn't remember choosing. The room was too angular. Every corner seemed to bend at degrees that made my eyes ache when I tried to focus. The walls were a gray that absorbed light rather than reflected it, and the temperature kept shifting, hot enough to make sweat bead on my forehead, then cold enough to see my breath, then neutral again, all within seconds. There was a desk in front of me. Metal. Institutional. The kind you'd find in a DMV or a tax office, scratched and dented from years of use. Behind it sat something that looked human from a distance, but the proportions were wrong. Arms too long. Fingers that had one too many joints. Skin the color of old parchment stretched over bones that shifted when he moved. He was flipping through papers, sighing with the exasperation of someone dealing with tedious work. "Name," he said without looking up. My throat felt raw. "What?" "Your name. I need your name for processing." I told him. He wrote it down with a pen that scratched too loudly against the paper, a sound that made my teeth hurt. Cause of assignment? I don't understand. He looked up then, and I saw his eyes. Yellow, with pupils that contracted vertically like a goat's. He stared at me with the bored irritation of a DMV clerk who'd been asked the same question for the 100th time. "What did you do to get sent here?" "Pact, ritual, summoning gone wrong, demonic contract, selling your soul for a record deal. The usual." "I didn't do any of that." He blinked slowly. "Everyone says that." "No, I mean it. I don't know where I am. I don't know how I got here. I went to sleep in my apartment in Baltimore and I woke up here." The creature, I couldn't think of him as a person anymore, set down his pen. For the first time, something other than boredom crossed his face. Confusion, maybe, or concern. "You're telling me you just appeared?" "Yes." He shuffled through more papers, muttering under his breath. The smell of burnt copper filled the air, sharp and metallic. It made me nauseous. "This is unusual," he said finally. "I'm going to need to escalate this." "Escalate to who?" He didn't answer. Instead, he pressed a button on his desk, and a door I hadn't noticed before slid open in the wall. Not a door that opened, a door that simply appeared, like reality had decided to make space for it. "Through there. Wait in processing chamber 7. Someone will be with you shortly." I stood on shaking legs. "What is this place?" He looked at me like I was stupid. "Where do you think?" The corridor beyond was endless. Gray walls stretched in both directions, punctuated by identical doors every 20 feet. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering occasionally. The floor was concrete, and my footsteps echoed with a hollowness that suggested vast empty spaces beyond the walls. Other people walked past me. Some looked human, others didn't. A woman in a business suit moved with mechanical precision, her eyes completely black. A man with skin like cracked ceramic shuffled by, whispering numbers under his breath. None of them looked at me. Processing chamber 7 was a waiting room. Plastic chairs bolted to the floor in neat rows, a water cooler in the corner that held liquid too dark to be water, a television mounted on the wall showing static. I sat. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time felt elastic here, stretching and compressing without pattern. A door opened, and someone else entered. Human. Definitely human. He was in his 60s maybe, with a weathered face and eyes that held too much awareness. He sat 2 chairs away from me and stared at the static on the television. "You're new," he said after a while. "I think so." "You remember who you are?" "Yes." He turned to look at me then, and I saw something flicker in his expression. Surprise. Then something darker. "That's rare." "What do you mean?" Most souls forget. The intake process strips away identity. Makes you easier to process, easier to assign, but we hold on. Usually because we earned it. Made deals, signed contracts, traded our will for something else. I didn't do any of that. Then you shouldn't be here. The words hung in the air between us. He said them with absolute certainty, and for the first time since waking up in that chair, I felt real fear. What is this place? I asked again. You know what it is, deep down. You knew the moment you woke up. I did. I'd been avoiding saying it, as if not naming it would make it less real. This is hell, I whispered. He nodded. Capital of the Infernum, the processing center, where souls get sorted and assigned to their eternal functions. Functions? You think hell is fire and torture? That's middle management stuff. Down here in the capital, it's about efficiency. Souls are resources. They get assigned based on the terms of their damnation. Some become fuel. Some become workers. Some become entertainment. My hands were shaking. I didn't do anything. I don't belong here. No, he agreed. You don't. And that's a problem. Before I could ask what he meant, the door opened again. This time, the creature that entered wasn't trying to look human. 8 feet tall with backward jointed legs and skin that looked like volcanic rock. Its face was a nightmare of too many features. 3 eyes, a mouth that split vertically, horns that curved forward like a ram's. Processing error, it said, voice like grinding stone. You. It pointed at me with a clawed hand. Come. The human grabbed my arm. Don't fight it. If you resist, they'll classify you as hostile. That's worse. I stood and followed the creature through another door, down another corridor. This one was different, warmer, with walls that seemed to pulse like living tissue. The smell of sulfur mixed with something organic, something rotting. We entered a chamber that was circular and vast. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above. In the center was a raised platform with glowing symbols carved into the stone. Stand there, the creature commanded. I obeyed. The symbols began to glow brighter, and I felt something scanning me. Not physically, something deeper. It felt like insects crawling through my memories, picking apart every decision I'd ever made. The sensation lasted forever and no time at all. When it stopped, I collapsed to my knees, gasping. The creature studied a tablet that had materialized in its hands. Its 3 eyes narrowed. Anomaly confirmed. No pact, no deal, no ritual, no summoning. Then why is he here? Another voice coming from the darkness above. Collection error. Valdris processed him without proper verification. A pause. Then from the darkness. That's problematic. Yes, Overseer. He retains full cognition? Confirmed. Another pause. Longer this time. Place him in holding sector 9. Restrict access. We need to determine protocol before this escalates. The creature, Valdris apparently, growled low in its throat. Overseer, if I may, this seems like administrative waste. We could just reassign— No. The voice from above was sharp. You've already triggered an alert by processing someone without proper classification. If we compound the error, it'll register with the auditors. Place him in holding and wait for further instruction. Valdris's expression suggested it wanted to argue, but it simply grabbed my arm with crushing force and dragged me back into the corridors. Holding Sector 9 was a cell, small with walls that seemed to breathe. A bench, a drain in the corner. Nothing else. Valdris shoved me inside. Stay here. Don't try anything stupid. The door sealed behind it, leaving me in darkness that wasn't quite complete. There was a faint phosphorescent glow from the walls, just enough to see the dimensions of my prison. I sat on the bench and tried to process what was happening. This couldn't be real. Hell wasn't supposed to be bureaucratic. It wasn't supposed to have processing chambers and holding cells and creatures worried about auditors. But my body told me it was real. The ache in my legs from standing, the dryness in my throat, the smell of sulfur that coated the back of my tongue. Time passed. I don't know how much. There were no windows, no clocks, no way to measure it. Eventually, I heard something. A whisper, coming from the walls themselves. "Can you hear me?" I looked around. No one was there. "Over here, the ventilation grate." I knelt and looked at the small grate near the floor. Through it, I could barely make out a face. "Who are you?" "Silas. I'm in the cell next to yours. How long have you been here?" "I don't know. Hours? Maybe longer." "First time in holding?" "First time in hell." A low whistle. "Fresh arrival. Let me guess, you remember everything?" "Yes." "And you didn't make a deal?" "No." Silence from the other side. Then, "You're in serious trouble, friend." "Why?" "Because you're not supposed to be here. And when the system realizes that, it doesn't just let you go. It tries to correct the error. And correction down here usually means termination." My stomach dropped. "They're going to kill me?" "Worse. They're going to unmake you. Erase you from the record entirely. Like you never existed." I pressed my forehead against the cold metal of the grate. "There has to be a way out." "There is, but it's not going to be pleasant, and we don't have much time." "Why not?" "Because you being here has already triggered something. The system knows there's an anomaly. And when the system knows, the auditors come." "Auditors?" "Angels," Silas said quietly. "And trust me, you don't want to be here when they arrive." The lights in my cell flickered once, twice, then went completely dark. In the blackness, I heard a sound that didn't belong. Wind chimes, delicate and crystalline, echoing through corridors that shouldn't carry such sounds. From the grate, Silas's voice came urgent and low. "They're already here." The wind chimes grew louder, closer, until they were right outside my cell. Then they stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. It pressed against my eardrums, heavy and absolute, like being underwater. I couldn't even hear my own breathing. Light appeared under the door. Not warm light, cold, white, clinical. It leaked through the gap like liquid, pooling on the floor of my cell before rising upward, defying physics entirely. The door didn't open. It simply ceased to exist, and in the space where it had been stood something that hurt to look at directly. Wings, I think. 6 of them, maybe more, folded in geometrically impossible configurations, a form that suggested human but kept shifting at the edges, like my eyes couldn't hold the full shape of it. And eyes, dozens of them, arranged in patterns across what might have been its torso, all watching me with the focused intensity of a scientist examining bacteria. "Designation," it said. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, reverberating inside my skull rather than through the air. I couldn't speak. My tongue felt thick and useless in my mouth. "Designation," it repeated, and this time the word carried weight that made my bones ache. I don't have one." The eyes blinked in sequence, creating a wave of motion across its form. "Explain." "I don't belong here. There was a mistake. I was brought here by error." The angel, because what else could it be, tilted its head. The motion was too smooth, too fluid, like watching a snake move. "Error acknowledged. Processing." It raised something that might have been a hand, and symbols appeared in the air between us. They scrolled past too quickly for me to read, glowing with that same cold light. "Record incomplete. Assignment pending. Consciousness retention. Anomalous. Free will quotient. Elevated beyond acceptable parameters." "What does that mean?" "It means," came Silas's voice from the next cell, "that you're breaking their system just by existing." The angel's attention shifted toward the wall separating our cells. Without any visible effort, the wall dissolved like smoke, revealing Silas standing in his own cell. He looked worse than I'd imagined, gaunt, with hollows under his eyes and scars that looked self-inflicted running up his arms. "Silas Carver," the angel said. "Designation contained paradox. Status: monitored. Your presence here is authorized. Yeah, I know, Silas muttered. Been here 70 years, haven't I? Long enough to know when you lot show up, things are about to get complicated. The angel returned its focus to me. You will accompany me for evaluation. Resistance will result in immediate dissolution. Wait, I said, fear overriding any sense of self-preservation. Dissolution? Termination of consciousness, erasure from all records, standard protocol for unsanctioned entities. Silas stepped forward. You can't do that. He's not an unsanctioned entity. He's a processing error. That falls under Article 17 of the Covenant. He gets tribunal review, not summary execution. The angel was silent for a long moment. Then, Article 17 protocols require joint oversight. Infernal representatives must be present. This complicates timeline. Tough, Silas said. Rules are rules, even down here. I had no idea what they were talking about, but Silas had just bought me time. The angel seemed to calculate, its many eyes blinking in patterns that might have been thought. Acknowledged. Joint tribunal will convene. Subject will remain in secure holding until proceedings commence. It turned to leave, and the wall between our cells began to reform. But before it could complete, Silas grabbed my arm and pulled me close to the dissolving barrier. Listen carefully, he whispered urgently. When they're not looking, follow the drain. It connects to the lower maintenance tunnels. Not every part of hell is monitored. Why are you helping me? Because I know what you are, even if you don't. You're not just an error. You're proof that the system is failing. And I've been waiting a long time to see it fail. The wall solidified completely, cutting off his voice. The angel hadn't seemed to notice our conversation, or perhaps it simply didn't care. It left through the door that had reappeared, sealing me back in darkness. But now I had something I didn't have before. A direction. I waited. Time crawled by with agonizing slowness. Eventually, the phosphorescent glow from the walls dimmed enough that I could move without being easily seen, assuming anything was watching. The drain in the corner was small, maybe 18 inches across, covered with a grate that looked rusted but felt disturbingly organic when I touched it. It took effort to pry it loose, and when it came free, the smell that wafted up nearly made me vomit. Decay and sulfur and something sweetly rotten. I had to dislocate my shoulder to fit through. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, but I bit down on my sleeve to keep from screaming. The tunnel beyond was tight, forcing me to crawl on my stomach through slime I couldn't identify and didn't want to. It went down. Steeply. I had to brace myself against the sides to keep from sliding, but my hands kept slipping. Eventually, gravity won, and I fell through darkness that seemed to last forever. I hit bottom hard enough to knock the wind from my lungs. When I could breathe again, I found myself in a larger tunnel, maybe 5 feet in diameter, with walls that were definitely organic. They pulsed rhythmically, like being inside a vein. There was light here, faint and reddish, coming from bioluminescent patches that grew in clusters along the ceiling. It cast everything in a hellish glow that made shadows dance. I heard movement behind me and spun around. Silas emerged from a different tunnel, looking far more composed than he should given where we were. You made it, he said, sounding almost surprised. How did you... Been escaping from cells longer than you've been alive. Come on. We don't have much time before they realize we're gone. He led me through a maze of tunnels that all looked identical. I quickly lost any sense of direction. The air grew thicker, harder to breathe, and the temperature climbed steadily. Where are we going? Somewhere they can't follow easily. The old archives. It's where they keep records that predate the current administration. Current administration? Hell isn't static. Power shifts. The demon lords who run things now aren't the ones who built the foundation. And the foundation holds secrets they'd rather keep buried. We emerged into a chamber that took my breath away. It was massive, stretching upward into darkness that seemed infinite. Shelves lined every wall, reaching higher than I could see, filled with books and scrolls and objects I couldn't identify. The air smelled of ancient paper and something else, Ozone, maybe, or the electrical charge before a storm. Silas moved with purpose, navigating the shelves like he'd been here before. He pulled down a book bound in leather that looked disturbingly like human skin. "This," he said, opening it to a page marked with a ribbon that might have been dried sinew, "is why you're dangerous to them." The text was written in a language I shouldn't have been able to read, but somehow the words made sense. It described something called the Old Covenant, an agreement made when heaven and hell were first separated. Rules governing the exchange of souls, the balance of power, the limitations on both sides, and there buried in subsection after subsection, was a clause I had to read 3 times to understand. No soul retaining free will shall cross the threshold involuntarily, for such passage creates instability in the fundamental architecture. Should this occur, the system shall initiate corrective measures to restore equilibrium. "I don't understand," I said. "What does corrective measures mean?" "It means the whole thing resets," Silas explained. "Heaven, hell, everything in between, gets wiped clean and rebuilt from scratch. But that hasn't happened in millennia, because both sides have been very careful to follow the rules. Until now. Until now. You being here violates the covenant. Your presence is like a crack in the foundation, and the longer you're here, the wider that crack gets." A sound echoed through the archives. Footsteps, dozens of them, coming from multiple directions. Silas's expression darkened. They found us faster than I expected. Demons poured into the chamber from every entrance, not the bureaucratic types I'd seen before. These were warriors, armored in black metal that seemed to absorb light, carrying weapons that crackled with energy that hurt to look at. Leading them was something different. It wore a suit, perfectly tailored, and looked almost human except for the eyes, solid silver, reflective as mirrors. When it spoke, its voice was cultured, educated, nothing like the crude Valdris. "Silas Carver, still causing problems after all these years, and you've dragged our little anomaly into the archives. How theatrical." "Abraxas," Silas said, and I heard genuine fear in his voice for the first time. "This doesn't concern you." "On the contrary, when angels start invoking Article 17, everyone in the hierarchy takes notice. Do you know what the last tribunal resulted in? The burning of 3 entire sectors, thousands of souls lost, production halted for decades. We're not eager to repeat that." Abraxas walked closer, and the warriors parted for it. It studied me with those mirror eyes, and I saw my own reflection staring back, terrified, small, utterly out of my depth. "You're an interesting problem," it said. "The angels want to extract you. We want to keep you. But neither option works, does it? Extraction triggers interference protocols. Retention violates containment parameters, quite the puzzle." "Then let me go," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "Send me back. Pretend this never happened." Abraxas smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp. "Impossible. The moment you crossed the threshold, you became part of the record. Erasing records is what triggered the last reset. We learned that lesson well." The sound of wind chimes filled the archive again, and this time it was accompanied by something else. Singing, if you could call it that. Voices in harmony. But the harmony was wrong. Notes that shouldn't exist together, creating sounds that made my head hurt. Angels appeared throughout the chamber, materializing from light that hadn't been there moments before. There were dozens of them, all surrounding us in a perfect circle. The demons tensed, but didn't attack. One angel stepped forward, taller than the others, with 8 wings instead of 6 and a face I could almost perceive as human. Male, maybe, with features carved from marble and eyes like burning coals. "Urakel," Abraxas said, and there was something in its tone I hadn't expected. Respect, or maybe fear. "Abraxas, the tribunal has been convened. All parties will attend, including the anomaly." "Under whose authority?" "The Covenant, Article 17, subsection 9. When systemic integrity is threatened, all involved parties must present before the Arbitration Council. The Council hasn't convened in 4,000 years. Then it's long overdue." The temperature in the archive plummeted. My breath came out in visible clouds. and frost formed on the nearest shelves. Around us, reality seemed to bend. The walls stretched, the ceiling lowered, dimensions shifting in ways that made my eyes water. When the distortion settled, we were somewhere else entirely. The chamber we stood in defied description. It was massive yet claustrophobic, bright yet dark, and the walls moved with patterns that suggested both technology and organic growth. In the center was a raised platform with 3 thrones, each carved from different materials, one from white stone that glowed with inner light, one from black stone that absorbed all light, and one from something gray and neutral that seemed to exist between states. Angels occupied one side of the chamber, demons the other, and in the empty space between them, Silas and I stood alone. "This is the Arbitration Council," Silas whispered, "where heaven and hell settle disputes that could break the covenant. I've heard stories, but I never thought I'd actually see it." The 3 thrones remained empty, but voices spoke from them anyway, overlapping, harmonizing, creating words from pure sound. The tribunal is called. State the nature of the dispute. Urikel stepped forward. "An unbound soul has crossed the threshold involuntarily. This violates Article 4 of the Covenant. We demand immediate extraction and restoration to proper status." Abraxas stepped forward from the demon side. "Extraction creates interference precedent. We invoke Article 12, non-interference in internal administration. The soul was processed according to standard collection protocols." "Protocols that were flawed," Urikel countered. "The collector failed to verify status. This constitutes negligence, not legitimate acquisition." The voices from the thrones grew louder, more complex. "Evidence will be reviewed. The soul in question will testify." All eyes, angelic and demonic, turned to me. The pressure of their combined attention felt like being crushed. I could barely breathe. "Speak," the voices commanded. "Tell us, did you summon bargain or willingly surrender your soul?" "No," I managed to say. "I did nothing. I went to sleep in my apartment and woke up here. That's all I know." "Impossible," one of the demons hissed. "Souls don't cross without invitation or transaction." "Yet the evidence supports his claim," Urikel said. "We've reviewed his life record. No contracts, no summoning, no pacts. He lived an ordinary existence with no occult involvement." "Then how—" "Collection error," Abraxas interrupted, and there was rage in its voice now. "Valdris processed him without proper verification. An administrative failure, not a systemic one." "An administrative failure that violates the covenant," Urikel pressed. "Regardless of intent, the result is the same. An innocent soul has been illegally detained." The voices from the thrones grew silent. The silence stretched, and in it I felt something terrible building, pressure, like the atmosphere before a hurricane. Finally, they spoke again. "The covenant is clear, but enforcement creates complications. Extraction requires our intervention in infernal territory. Retention violates terms of innocent soul protections. Resolution is unclear." "Then what happens to me?" I shouted, fear overriding any sense of propriety. "I didn't ask for any of this. I don't want to be here, but I don't want to just cease existing either." Silas grabbed my arm. "Don't—" But it was too late. The moment I'd spoken with genuine emotion, with real choice behind my words, something changed in the chamber. The lights flickered. The walls shuddered. And from the 3 thrones came a sound I can only describe as alarm. "Free will," the voices said, and now they sounded frightened. "The anomaly retains unconstrained free will while existing in absolute territory. This is not administrative failure. This is systemic breach." The angels and demons began to stir, agitation spreading through both sides. Urikel's face showed something I hadn't expected, concern bordering on panic. "How long has he been here?" the voices demanded. "Approximately 16 hours, Abraxas answered. "Unacceptable. Every moment of continued presence widens the breach. The mechanism is responding. We are detecting cascade warnings across multiple dimensional boundaries." "What does that mean?" I asked, but nobody answered. Silas, however, looked at me with an expression of grim understanding. It means you're not just a mistake anymore. You're a trigger, and something much bigger than angels and demons is about to wake up. The chamber began to shake, not violently but rhythmically like a heartbeat. And with each pulse I felt something enormous stirring, something that had been sleeping for a very, very long time. The heartbeat grew stronger. Each pulse sent vibrations through the stone beneath our feet, and with each one the architecture of the chamber began to change, not deteriorate, transform. The walls developed patterns that were too complex to follow, mathematical and organic simultaneously, as if reality itself was trying to solve an equation. I could feel each pulse in my chest, syncing with my own heartbeat until I couldn't tell where mine ended and the other began. The sensation was nauseating, like my body was being tuned to a frequency it wasn't designed to handle. My vision blurred at the edges, and I tasted copper on my tongue. The voices from the thrones had gone silent. Angels and demons alike stood frozen, not in obedience but in something closer to primal terror. Even Urikel, who had seemed untouchable moments before, had its wings drawn tight against its body in a defensive posture. I watched as several of the lesser demons began to shake, their forms flickering like bad television reception. "What's happening?" I asked, though I suspected I didn't want the answer. Silas's face had gone pale, and I noticed his hands were trembling. In all the time I'd known him, which admittedly wasn't long, I'd never seen him show this kind of fear. The mechanism, the thing that keeps heaven and hell separated, the foundation beneath all of this. It's waking up. Why? Because you're the proof it's failing. The system was designed to be perfect. No errors, no anomalies, no unaccounted variables. But you exist, and your existence means there's a flaw, a crack in the foundation. He grabbed my arm, his grip tight enough to hurt. "Listen to me. What happens next? You need to stay calm. Don't let it see fear. Don't let it see doubt. Whatever it shows you, whatever it says, remember that it's not alive the way we understand life. It's more like a program, a set of rules that gained awareness." The temperature dropped even further. My fingers were going numb, and I could see frost forming on the metal of the nearest demon's armor. But worse than the cold was the sensation of being watched by something incomprehensibly vast. Not watched the way the angels had watched me. This was different. This was the attention of something for which consciousness was just one of many tools, like a human using a microscope to examine bacteria. I felt my skin crawl, every hair on my body standing on end. The air itself seemed to thicken, becoming harder to breathe, each inhalation requiring conscious effort. Around us, the geometry of the chamber continued to shift. Corners appeared where there shouldn't be corners, angles that made my eyes hurt, distances that changed depending on how I looked at them. Words began forming in the air itself, not sound, not light, but reality bending into language. The letters appeared as distortions, as if space itself was being twisted into shapes that approximated writing. Anomaly confirmed, integrity breach detected, initiating diagnostic protocol. Each word resonated through my bones, vibrating at frequencies that shouldn't have been possible. I felt them in my teeth, in my skull, in the marrow of my bones. Several angels collapsed to their knees, hands pressed to their heads. Even Abraxas, with all its composure, had taken a step backward. "Diagnostic protocol," Abraxas said, and its cultured voice had become strained, cracking at the edges. "That's never been activated. Not in recorded history. Not since—" It stopped, looking at Urikel. The angel met its gaze, and something passed between them. Shared knowledge of something terrible. Reviewing covenant parameters. Analyzing breach origin. Anomalous entity identified. The attention focused entirely on me, and it felt like being dissected. Every memory, every choice, every moment of my existence spread out and examined with clinical precision. I saw my life playing out in fragments around me, childhood memories floating like bubbles, adult decisions displayed as branching paths, every word I'd ever spoken echoing in overlapping whispers. I felt violated in ways I didn't have words for. It wasn't just seeing my memories. It was feeling them analyzed, categorized, judged according to parameters I couldn't understand. My first kiss, my mother's funeral, the time I'd helped a stranger change a tire, the time I'd lied to avoid responsibility. All of it dissected with equal dispassion. Entity designation, unknown. Classification, unbound will in absolute territory. Status, critical violation. Please, I said, though I wasn't sure who I was begging. I didn't mean for any of this. Intent irrelevant. Presence creates instability, calculating resolution options. The patterns on the walls began to spin faster, and in them I could see possibilities unfolding, futures branching and collapsing, each one a different outcome. In most of them I simply ceased to exist. In others I was absorbed into something larger. My consciousness dispersed across the machinery of reality itself. In a few, very few, I remained myself, but trapped in a space between spaces, isolated forever. None of them looked like freedom. There has to be another way, Silas said, stepping forward. His voice was steady, but I could see the effort it took. The mechanism's attention shifted to him and he flinched, a full-body spasm like he'd been struck, but held his ground. I've been here for 70 years, kept in limbo because I'm a paradox, damned but not quite damned enough. You used me as a patch, a temporary fix for a crack that was already forming. But patches fail. Systems degrade. What's happening now was always inevitable. The words in the air reformed, slower this time, as if the mechanism was considering rather than simply processing. Paradox entity acknowledged. Temporary stabilization measures proven insufficient. Current breach exceeds previous parameters. Silas took another step forward and I saw blood beginning to trickle from his nose. The proximity to the mechanism's full attention was hurting him, but he didn't stop. So fix the system properly instead of just deleting the evidence, he said, and now his voice was rising, passionate in a way I hadn't heard before. He's not the problem, he's the symptom. The collection protocols are flawed. The verification processes have gaps. Hell, I was collected 70 years ago on a contract that was never properly fulfilled. And nobody noticed until I started asking questions. How many others? How many errors have you been papering over instead of addressing? Around us, the angels and demons had gone completely still. Uricle's eyes, those burning coal eyes, were fixed on Silas with what might have been respect or horror. Proposed solution requires fundamental restructuring. Restructuring necessitates temporary suspension of all operations. Estimated duration, unknown. Risk assessment, unacceptable. Unacceptable to who? I found myself saying, my voice echoing strangely in the chamber. To you? To them? I gestured at the angels and demons, my hand shaking with anger I didn't know I had. I'm a person. I have a life. I had a job. I had an apartment. I had a neighbor who borrowed my lawnmower and never returned it, and I never said anything because he was going through a difficult time. I had plans for next weekend. I was going to visit my sister. None of this was supposed to happen to me. My voice cracked, and I realized there were tears on my face. You can't just erase me because I'm inconvenient. That's not justice, that's not balance, that's just cruelty. The mechanism's attention pressed down harder, and I felt my knees buckle. The weight of it was enormous, like trying to stand under an ocean. But I forced myself to keep talking, forced words through the pressure. You're supposed to be about balance, right? Heaven and hell, reward and punishment, cosmic justice or whatever. But there's no justice in this. I didn't do anything wrong. I lived a normal life. I was kind when I could be. I helped people when I could. I tried to do right by the people around me, and now I'm being punished for someone else's mistake. Justice is not a function of the mechanism. Balance is the only parameter. Your presence creates imbalance. Correction required. Then the mechanism is broken, I said, and the moment the words left my mouth, the chamber erupted in chaos. The angels surged forward, but not toward me, toward the thrones. Urakel was shouting something I couldn't hear over the sudden roar of sound, a cacophony of grinding metal, breaking stone, and something that might have been screaming reality itself. The demons scattered, some fleeing through exits that appeared and disappeared in the walls like wounds opening and closing, others forming defensive positions with weapons drawn. The floor beneath us began to crack, not with simple fractures but with splits that revealed glimpses of other places, burning landscapes, frozen wastelands, impossible geometries that hurt to perceive. One demon stumbled too close to a crack and simply fell through, its scream cutting off instantly as the gap sealed behind it. And through it all, the heartbeat continued, faster now, more urgent, like a racing pulse approaching cardiac arrest. Unacceptable declaration. Entity denies fundamental truth. This constitutes rejection of absolute authority. The words appeared larger this time, burning themselves into the air with such intensity that they left afterimages on my retinas. The walls began to weep, actual tears of some luminescent fluid that ran down in rivulets, pooling on the fragmenting floor. Yes, I said, feeling something break open inside me. Not breaking down, breaking free, like chains I hadn't known I was wearing suddenly snapping. I reject it. I reject this whole system. I'm not a resource to be processed or a problem to be solved. I'm a person, and I choose to remain one. The patterns on the walls stopped spinning. Everything stopped. The angels mid-flight, wings frozen in impossible positions, the demons mid-retreat, faces locked in expressions of terror. Even the heartbeat. The silence was total and absolute, so complete that it felt like pressure against my eardrums. I could hear my own breathing, magnified in the stillness. Each exhale seemed to echo forever. My heart hammered against my ribs, and I was certain everyone could hear it. Then, from everywhere and nowhere, the mechanism spoke differently. The words were the same format, but there was something beneath them now. Something that might have been confusion, or might have been something else entirely. The first stirrings of genuine thought rather than programmed response. Choice retained in absolute environment. Paradox compounded. Calculation error. Recalculating. Error persists. Impossible condition detected. Silas grabbed my shoulder, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. What did you do? I don't know. You chose. Really chose. Not just responded or reacted. You made an autonomous decision while existing in a place where choice shouldn't be possible. You didn't just crack the foundation, you broke it. His eyes were wide, but there was something in them now. Not fear, but awe. Do you understand what this means? Every soul that's ever been processed, every demon that's ever served, every angel that's ever enforced the rules, they've all been operating within the system's parameters, but you just said no, you just refused. The chamber began to fragment, not falling apart but splitting into multiple versions of itself. I could see layers of reality peeling away from each other like pages in a book. The chamber as it was, as it had been, as it could be, as it might have been if different choices had been made. All existing simultaneously, occupying the same space but vibrating at different frequencies. Through the fragmenting layers I saw glimpses of other tribunals. Ancient ones, recent ones, ones that might not have happened yet. In one layer, I saw myself dissolving into light. In another, I saw myself transformed into something neither human nor demon. In a third, I simply wasn't there at all, as if I'd never existed. System instability, critical, reset protocol engaged. All entities will be no. The word came from the gray throne, the one between the white and black, the one that had remained empty throughout the tribunal. Now something sat there, not a being, but a presence. An absence of presence, a space where something should be but wasn't, and yet somehow was. Looking at it hurt in a way that was difficult to describe. It wasn't pain exactly, but more like trying to perceive something my mind wasn't equipped to process. The space around the throne bent inward, creating a gravitational pull on my perception. I found myself unable to look away, even as my eyes watered from the strain. When it spoke, The mechanism went silent. The words didn't appear in the air, they simply existed, bypassing language entirely and manifesting directly as meaning in my consciousness. The anomaly has demonstrated capacity for true choice in an environment designed to eliminate choice. This was not supposed to be possible, but it is. Therefore, our fundamental assumptions are flawed. The presence turned its attention, if it could be called that, toward me. The weight of it was different from the mechanism's attention. Where the mechanism had felt like being examined, this felt like being understood. Every facet of my being acknowledged, not judged but simply seen. You cannot remain here, but you cannot return to where you were. The act of crossing has changed you in ways that make pure existence in either realm impossible. You have become something that exists between states, neither damned nor saved, neither mortal nor eternal. Around us, the angels and demons remained frozen, but I could see their forms beginning to blur at the edges, as if they were being affected by whatever was happening to reality itself. Then where do I go? My voice sounded small, childlike in the face of this vast presence. You create a third option, as you just demonstrated with your choice. The system was designed with only two outcomes: acceptance or rejection, salvation or damnation, light or dark. But you have introduced a third state, refusal to be categorized. And where that state exists, space must be created to contain it. The chamber split further, and in the widening gaps between realities I saw something forming. A space that was neither heaven nor hell, neither mortal nor eternal. Just between. Empty, but with the potential to be filled. Silent, but with the capacity for sound. Gray like the throne, like the presence itself. Neutral, undefined. Waiting. It looked like fog or mist or the space between thoughts. Watching it made me dizzy, made my stomach turn, but also filled me with something that might have been relief or might have been terror. I couldn't tell which. This is the consequence of true choice, the presence said, and now its voice carried something that might have been sadness, or might have been approval. You demanded autonomy in a system designed to eliminate it. Now you must exist with that autonomy, but outside the system entirely. You will be the first to inhabit this space and possibly the last, or possibly the first of many. The mechanism cannot calculate which outcome is more likely, because your choice has introduced too many variables. Forever? The word caught in my throat. Time functions differently in between spaces. What you experience as forever may be a moment. What feels like a moment may be an eternity. There is no reference point. No sunrise to mark days, no seasons to mark years. Only existence, undefined and unconstrained. I looked at the gray expanse and felt something inside me recoil. The freedom I'd demanded suddenly felt like abandonment. To exist outside the system meant to exist outside everything. No connection, no context, no meaning except what I could create myself. Silas stepped forward again, and I saw that he was crying. Silent tears running down his weathered face, cutting tracks through decades of accumulated pain. "Take me with him," he said, his voice breaking on the words. The presence regarded him, and I felt the weight of its attention shift. "You have endured paradox for decades, existing in limbo between states, serving as a patch for a flaw you did not create. Why seek further isolation? Why not accept resolution? The mechanism can offer you either damnation or dissolution. Both would end your suffering." "Because he's right," Silas said, and now his voice was stronger, carrying conviction that seemed to fill the chamber. "The system is broken. I've known it for 70 years, but I was too afraid to say it out loud. Too afraid that acknowledging the flaw would mean I'd be erased to hide the evidence, but he said it. He stood here in front of all of you and declared that the foundation itself is flawed." He turned to look at me, and his eyes held something I hadn't seen before. Hope, maybe, or belief. "And I'm tired of being a patch. I'm tired of existing as a temporary measure, a stopgap solution to a problem nobody wants to address. If there's a space outside the system, that's where I want to be. Even if it means isolation, even if it means losing what little stability I have. At least it would be honest. Your soul is bound by contract, the presence said. And now there was something almost like warning in its tone. The terms were fulfilled. Imperfectly, perhaps, but fulfilled nonetheless. Your debt was paid. Your damnation is legitimate according to the covenant. Were never fulfilled, Silas interrupted, his jaw set with determination. I traded my soul for knowledge, true knowledge, not riddles or half-truths. I was promised understanding of the fundamental nature of reality. What I received was paradox and confusion, and 70 years of existing in limbo. The contract is void. I know the law better than you think. Article 23, subsection 12. Contracts fulfilled inadequately are subject to nullification upon appeal. A long pause. The entire chamber seemed to hold its breath. Even the fragmenting realities stilled, waiting for the presence's response. Then, acknowledged. Your binding is dissolved. The contract is declared void. You are free to choose your destination. Silas smiled, and it was the first genuine smile I'd seen since arriving in this place. Not the grim acknowledgement of someone accepting their fate, but actual joy, relief and vindication and something like peace. Thank you, he whispered, and I heard decades of weightlifting from those two words. The presence turned back to me and I felt the full focus of its attention again. Final warning, this space will be shaped by your consciousness. Whatever you believe, whatever you fear, whatever you desire, it will manifest. You will be completely alone except for Silas. There will be no other souls, no other entities, no divine intervention or demonic interference. Are you certain this is preferable to cessation? To simply stopping, painlessly and instantly? I looked at the angels, frozen in their aggressive posture, faces locked in expressions of righteous fury, at the demons, scattered and fearful, some still trying to flee through gaps that opened and closed in the walls, at the mechanism's patterns, still visible at the edges of perception, still trying to calculate a solution to an impossible problem. I thought about my apartment in Baltimore, my job at the accounting firm, the mundane, ordinary life I'd been living, unremarkable but mine, and I thought about what would happen if I just let go, if I accepted dissolution. Would anyone even notice I was gone? Would reality simply fill in the gap, rewrite itself so I'd never existed? Yes, I said, and my voice didn't shake. I'm certain. I'd rather exist in isolation than not exist at all. I'd rather be myself in emptiness than be nothing in the system's perfection. Then go. The fragments of reality collapsed inward, and Silas and I fell through the gaps between them. The sensation was like drowning in reverse, being pulled upward through layers of water that became progressively less substantial until we weren't in water at all, but something that had no name, something that might have been the raw stuff of reality itself, unformed and undefined. I felt my body stretching, compressing, folding through dimensions that shouldn't exist. Colors I'd never seen before flashed past, not variations of familiar colors, but entirely new wavelengths that my brain struggled to process, sounds that were also textures, smells that were also temperatures. My senses became confused, overlapping until I couldn't tell where one ended and another began. Then, abruptly, it stopped. We landed, if landing was the right word, in a space that was gray and featureless. Not empty exactly, but undefined, like a canvas before the first brushstroke or a page before the first word. The gray wasn't dark or light, wasn't warm or cold. It simply was. There was ground beneath my feet, but I couldn't see it. There was air to breathe, but I couldn't smell it. There was light coming from somewhere, but no source I could identify. Everything existed in a state of potential, waiting to be determined. Silas stood beside me, looking around at the emptiness. He brushed himself off, though there was nothing to brush away, a habitual gesture from decades of existing in a physical form. Well, he said, and his voice sounded strange here, sounded both closer and more distant than it should have been. This is different. What do we do now? He was quiet for a long moment, and I watched emotions play across his face: confusion, wonder, uncertainty, and something that might have been excitement. Whatever we want, I suppose, we're outside the rules. Outside the system. There's no protocol for this, no procedure to follow, no expectations to meet. He paused, looking around at the emptiness with eyes that had seen too much but never this. You know, in all my years trapped between damnation and salvation, I never imagined something like this was possible. I thought there were only two options: up or down, saved or damned, light or dark. The idea of a third way, of something outside the binary. It never occurred to me to even try. Do you think we're free? I asked, and the question hung in the gray emptiness, echoing in ways that defied normal acoustics. He considered the question, really considered it, his weathered face contemplative. Free from them? Yes. Free from the system, from the rules, from the hierarchy and the processing and the endless machinery of cosmic bureaucracy. But free from ourselves? He met my eyes. That's a different question. Maybe harder. We brought ourselves here, our memories, our choices, our regrets. Those don't just disappear because we're outside the system. Time passed, though I couldn't measure it. There was no sun to mark the passage of days, no moon to track the nights, no seasons to indicate years. We existed in a perpetual now that somehow also felt like forever. The space began to change slowly, taking on characteristics that reflected my thoughts. When I thought about having a floor to stand on, the gray beneath my feet solidified into something that felt like concrete. Not exactly concrete, but close enough to be familiar. When I remembered the color of the sky on autumn afternoons, the gray above took on hints of blue and gold, never quite resolving into actual color, but suggesting it. Silas contributed too. His memories of the world above shaped the light, gave it the quality of dawn rather than the flat, institutional fluorescence of hell. When he thought about the last time he'd felt grass under his feet, textures began to appear, not real grass, but the impression of it, enough to satisfy the memory without fully manifesting. We talked. Endlessly, it seemed, though maybe it was only moments. We shared our stories, compared our lives, tried to make sense of what had happened and what it meant. He told me about the deal he'd made, young, ambitious, desperate for knowledge that would set him apart. He'd been a philosophy student, brilliant but unrecognized, frustrated by the limitations of human understanding. When the offer came, he'd taken it without hesitation, trading his soul for true comprehension of reality's fundamental nature. But they gave me paradox instead, he said, and his voice carried the weight of decades of disappointment. Every answer led to more questions. Every truth revealed deeper contradictions. I understood more, yes, but comprehension brought only confusion. And when I complained, when I argued that the contract had been violated, they locked me in limbo, made me into a patch for a flaw I didn't create. I told him about my life. Unremarkable, ordinary, the kind of existence most people lived without thinking it was anything special. Working at an accounting firm, helping small businesses keep their books in order. Dating occasionally, but never finding anyone who felt like they fit. Visiting my sister every few months, playing with my niece and nephew, being the uncle who brought weird toys and told silly jokes. It wasn't much, I admitted, but it was mine, and nobody asked if I wanted to give it up. That's the difference between us, Silas said thoughtfully. I chose to gamble with my soul. You never even got the choice. Maybe that's why you were able to refuse the mechanism, because you'd never agreed to play by its rules in the first place. Days passed, or maybe years. We built structures from thought and memory, approximations of houses, of parks, of streets we'd once walked. They were pale imitations, hollow shells that satisfied the need for familiarity without ever feeling truly real. But they were ours, shaped by our will rather than imposed by some external system. We created routines because we needed them. Waking at arbitrary times, eating imaginary food that satisfied without nourishing, sleeping in beds that existed because we believed they should. The gray responded to our expectations, giving us what we needed to maintain some sense of normalcy. But always, underneath it all, was the emptiness, the knowledge that nothing we created here was real, that we were playing house in a void, pretending at existence while being fundamentally disconnected from everything that had once given life meaning. And then, one day, or maybe one moment, or maybe one eternity, Silas simply wasn't there anymore. I'd been shaping a memory of a coffee shop I used to visit in Baltimore, trying to get the smell right. When I realized he wasn't responding to my questions, I turned and found him collapsed on what passed for the floor, his form becoming translucent at the edges, fading like old photographs left in sunlight. "Silas!" I dropped to my knees beside him, reaching out to grab his shoulder. My hand passed partially through him before finding enough substance to hold. He felt cold. Colder than anything should feel in this place where temperature was whatever we decided it should be. He smiled weakly, and even that small gesture seemed to cost him enormous effort. "Guess I had less time than I thought," he managed, his voice thin and distant. 70 years of existing as a paradox takes a toll on the soul. The binding was the only thing holding me together, keeping me coherent. Without it— "No," I said, feeling panic rise in my chest like water flooding a sinking ship. "We just got here. You can't leave. I can't do this alone. I don't know how to exist here without—" "You'll learn," he interrupted. And now there was blood at the corner of his mouth, dark, almost black, like oil. "You're stronger than you know. Strong enough to refuse the mechanism. Strong enough to demand a third option when only two existed. You'll figure it out." His form flickered, solidifying for a moment before fading again, like a signal struggling to maintain connection. I tightened my grip on his shoulder as if physical contact could anchor him here, could keep him from dissolving entirely. "I'm scared," I admitted, the words coming out in a rush. "I thought having you here meant I wouldn't be completely alone, that we could figure this out together. Build something meaningful, maybe. Find purpose in this emptiness." "I know," he whispered, and one of his hands, barely substantial now, more suggestion than solid matter, reached up to grip mine. "I'm scared too. Scared of what comes next. Because I don't think I'm going anywhere. Not heaven, not hell, not back to the system. I think I'm just dispersing, becoming part of the gray. And I don't know if that means I'll cease to exist or if I'll become something else entirely." He coughed, and more of that dark fluid came up. His eyes, which had held so much knowledge and sadness and hard-won wisdom, were losing their focus. "Listen to me carefully," he said, his voice dropping to barely audible. "You need to understand something important. What you did back there, choosing to exist outside the system, it created ripples. The mechanism is going to spend a very long time trying to figure out how you did it, trying to calculate how a single human soul managed to introduce a variable it couldn't predict. And while it's distracted, while it's focused on solving the puzzle you represent, other anomalies will slip through. Other errors, other cracks in the foundation." "That's bad, isn't it?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Maybe," he said, and now his smile was genuine despite the pain clearly etched across his fading features. "Or maybe it's how the system finally evolves into something better. Maybe every structure needs to be broken before it can be rebuilt properly. Maybe you're not a mistake, maybe you're a catalyst. The first domino that tips, starting a chain reaction that changes everything." His breathing had become labored, each inhale a struggle. I could feel him getting lighter in my arms, his form losing mass and cohesion. "I never told you," he continued, forcing the words out. "But I was there when they built the first tribunal chamber. Thousands of years ago, before I was bound, before I became a patch. I was just a soul passing through, still new to hell, still trying to understand the rules. And I remember thinking how perfect everything seemed, how ordered, how precise, like a machine designed to run forever without error." He paused, struggling for breath. "But perfection is brittle. It can't adapt, can't change, can't grow. You showed them that. You showed all of them, Angels, demons, the mechanism itself, that something imperfect and human and flawed could be stronger than their perfect system. Tears were streaming down my face now, hot against my skin in contrast to the neutral temperature of the gray void. What should I do? After you're gone, what am I supposed to do here? Whatever you want, he said, and his voice was barely a whisper now. That's the point. That's the gift you fought for. Pure autonomy, unconstrained by anyone else's rules or expectations. It's terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Most people never get to experience that. Most souls never get to choose their existence entirely on their own terms. His form was almost completely transparent now. I could see the gray through him, see my own hands where they gripped his dissolving shoulders. Remember that, he said, his final words arriving as barely more than breath. You did something that shouldn't have been possible. You demanded meaning in a system designed to eliminate it. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most profound thing any soul can do. Not accepting the answer you're given, but insisting on asking the question in the first place. His form dissolved completely then, becoming light that faded into the gray emptiness. It didn't disappear all at once. Rather, it dispersed gradually, spreading outward like ink in water, until I couldn't tell where he ended and the void began. And then I was alone. Truly, completely, absolutely alone. I don't know how long I've been here. Time doesn't function the way it should, or maybe it functions exactly as it's supposed to in a place outside all reference points. Sometimes what feels like years passes in what might be minutes. Other times, a single thought seems to stretch for eternity. The space responds to my thoughts, but it's a pale imitation of real existence. I can create approximations of my apartment, the worn couch where I used to watch television, the kitchen table with its perpetually sticky spot I never quite cleaned properly, even the crack in the ceiling that looked like a face if you stared at it long enough. But they're hollow, missing something essential. The walls I create have no weight. The furniture exists, but doesn't age or accumulate dust or develop the character that comes from actual use. It's like living in a photograph, or a memory that's been replayed so many times it's lost its connection to the original event. I've tried to recreate other places too. The park where I used to eat lunch on nice days, sitting on a specific bench under an oak tree that must be 100 years old by now. The grocery store where I knew all the cashiers by name, where they'd make small talk about the weather and sports teams. The coffee shop where I'd work on weekends where the barista knew I took my coffee black with 1 sugar. But none of it feels right. None of it feels real. Because real things have consequences. Coffee gets cold if you don't drink it. Benches get wet when it rains. Groceries expire if you don't use them. Here, nothing changes unless I actively will it to change. And willing something to change isn't the same as it changing on its own, following the natural laws of physics and time. Sometimes I feel presences at the edges of this space. Not physical presences, but something more subtle. Like being watched through a one-way mirror, or sensing someone standing just outside your peripheral vision. Echoes maybe of the mechanism checking on me. Or angels and demons trying to understand what I've become, what this third space represents, whether it poses a threat to their carefully maintained balance. But they never enter. Can't enter or won't. I'm not sure which. Maybe this space only exists because I exist in it, and their presence would collapse the paradox. Or maybe they're simply afraid of what might happen if they cross into territory that exists outside their jurisdiction. The worst part isn't the isolation, though, that's bad enough. It's the doubt. Did I make the right choice? The question loops through my mind endlessly, wearing grooves in my consciousness like a record that skips on the same phrase over and over. Should I have accepted cessation instead? Just let go, stopped existing, released myself from the burden of consciousness? Was existing as myself, maintaining my identity, my autonomy, my capacity for choice, worth the price of existing nowhere, connected to nothing? Is it better to be alone and aware, or to simply not be at all? I still don't know. Some days, if day means anything here, I think I made the right choice. That consciousness, even in isolation, is preferable to the alternative. that being myself, however alone, is worth any price. Other times I'm not so sure. When the silence becomes too heavy, when the gray presses in and I can't remember what real sunlight looked like or how actual wind felt against my skin, I wonder if I condemn myself to something worse than cessation, an eternity of existence without meaning, without connection, without purpose. But there are moments, rare, unpredictable moments that arrive without warning, when something changes. The gray takes on color that isn't quite color but suggests it, a warmth that might be yellow, a coolness that might be blue, textures that hint at green and brown and all the shades I used to take for granted. Sound emerges from the silence, not actual sound, but the impression of it. Distant music, or voices, or the rustling of leaves and wind that doesn't exist here. And in those moments I feel something that might be another consciousness touching the edges of this space. Not trying to enter, just acknowledging, reaching out across whatever barriers separate this void from the rest of existence, making contact for a fleeting instant before disappearing. Are they other souls? Other anomalies who refuse to fit into the system's binary? Other mistakes that found ways to keep existing outside the rules? Or am I imagining it all, creating the impression of contact because isolation has driven me to the edge of whatever passes for sanity in this place? I don't know. I can never be sure. But I hold on to those moments. I remember them, replay them, analyze them from every angle, because they suggest something I desperately want to believe, that I'm not alone, that somewhere in some other corner of this vast emptiness, other souls exist, other refusals, other third options, and in those moments, I remember what Silas said in his final breaths, about ripples, about cracks, about the system trying to evolve, being forced to adapt to accommodate something it was never designed to handle. Maybe I'm not imprisoned here. Maybe I'm something else entirely. A seed planted in ground that shouldn't exist, waiting to see what grows. The first cell of an organism that doesn't yet have a name, but will eventually develop into something complex and strange and unprecedented. Or maybe I'm just a mistake that found a way to keep existing, suspended in the space between correction and catastrophe, neither resolved nor destroyed. The truth is, I'll probably never know. Not with the kind of certainty I used to crave back when I lived in Baltimore, when I worked at my accounting job and believed that every question had an answer if you just looked hard enough. But I'm still here, still aware, still myself. That has to count for something. And some nights, if night even exists here, if darkness has any meaning in a place where light is only what I decide it should be, the silence becomes too complete, too perfect, too absolute. It's not the ordinary silence of an empty room or a quiet street. It's the silence of absence itself, the silence that comes when every sound in the universe stops simultaneously, when even the background hum of existence ceases. In those moments I can hear my own heartbeat, my own breathing, magnified until they become deafening. And then even those sounds seem to fade, until I wonder if I'm still breathing at all, if my heart is still beating, or if I've become something that no longer needs such physical anchors. In those two silent nights I feel it most strongly. The weight of something enormous, something patient, something that exists outside even this outside space. Like the mechanism is still there, still aware of me, still calculating. Or like reality itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen, waiting to see if I'll finally collapse under the weight of isolation, if I'll dissolve like Silas did, if I'll beg to be let back into the system even if it means cessation. Those are the nights I remember the heartbeat of the mechanism, that rhythmic pulse I felt in the tribunal chamber, the sensation of something vast and terrible waking up. And I wonder if what I did was truly delay something inevitable, or if I simply postponed it. If somewhere, in the machinery that underlies all of existence, a clock is still ticking down toward a moment when the system will complete whatever correction I interrupted. I wonder if, eventually, the mechanism will solve the equation I represent, calculate a way to eliminate the paradox without triggering the cascade that would destroy everything, find a loophole in its own rules that allows it to reach into this between space and extract me, process me, file me away properly so the cosmic accounting balances again. Or worse, I wonder if other souls are waking up in impossible places right now. If the crack I created is widening, letting more errors through, more people going to sleep in their apartments in Baltimore or Boston or Beijing and waking up in waiting rooms with demons who don't understand how they got there, more souls retaining consciousness when they shouldn't, refusing to fit into the binary of saved or damned. And if that's happening, if the cracks are widening, then what comes next? Does the system adapt? Does it rebuild itself to accommodate the possibility of third options, of spaces outside the binary? Or does it do what failing systems often do, collapse entirely, taking everything with it? I don't have answers to these questions. I'm not sure anyone does. I'm not even sure the questions are the right ones to ask. But I'm here, outside the system, beyond the rules, aware of my existence in a way that most souls never are, freed from the constraints of heaven and hell, but also cut off from everything that once gave life meaning. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Maybe consciousness itself, pure, unconstrained autonomous consciousness, is its own justification. Maybe the ability to ask questions like, why does any of this exist, is more important than having answers. Maybe doubt is a form of freedom, uncertainty a kind of victory. Or maybe I'm just lying to myself, constructing elaborate philosophical justifications for what amounts to a prison sentence, telling myself stories about purpose and meaning and evolution when the truth is simpler and darker. I'm trapped here, alone, and no amount of rationalization will change that. The silence presses in again, heavy, absolute, patient, waiting, always waiting. For what, I don't know. For me to break? For the mechanism to find a solution? For other souls to arrive and populate this emptiness with something resembling community? For reality itself to give up on maintaining the fiction that I still exist? I sit in the approximation of my Baltimore apartment, in the chair that doesn't accumulate wear, staring at walls that don't age, listening to silence that never quite breaks. And I wait too. Because that's all I can do now. Exist. Remember. Wonder. Hope, sometimes, in the moments when the gray takes on color and I feel those distant touches of possible consciousness. And fear in the two silent nights, that I've condemned myself to an eternity of asking questions that will never be answered. The system is still out there. The mechanism is still calculating. The angels and demons are still maintaining their balance. And somewhere, in apartments and houses and places I'll never see again, people are living ordinary lives, sleeping peacefully, unaware that the cosmic machinery beneath reality is fracturing, that the rules governing existence are being rewritten by souls who refuse to be categorized. I wonder if they'll thank me when it all comes crashing down, or if they'll curse me for breaking something that, for all its flaws, at least gave them certainty about where they'd end up when they died. The silence holds, the gray remains, the waiting continues, and I remain myself, for whatever that's worth.